I'm Dr. Melanie Joy. I am an author and a psychologist and a trainer, and I'm the founding president of the NGO Beyond Carnism. I went vegan shortly after 1989, and what happened was that, I guess leading up to that, I was always a person who cared about animals, certainly. I actually loved animals. I also cared very much about justice. I was always very justice-minded. And I had a dog who I loved, like a brother, actually, who I grew up with. His name was Fritz. And of course, I grew up eating animals like most people do. And I just didn't think for many years, I never thought about why I could pet my dog with one hand, but eat a pork chop with the other. Even though that pork chop had once been an animal who was at least as intelligent and sentient as my dog. And what happened was that in 1989, I was 23 years old. I ate a hamburger that turned out to have been contaminated with Campylobacter, very serious bacteria. And I got extremely, extremely ill. I wound up hospitalized on intravenous antibiotics. And after that experience, I stopped eating meat because I was just disgusted by it. I was like, I couldn't believe how sick I had been. So at that point, I became a vegetarian, sort of by accident. And then I started doing some research, to figure out how to cook for myself, how to shop for myself. This led me to information about animal agriculture. I met a person who was actually a vegan in this process, who talked about dairy and the dairy industry. And then, so shortly after becoming vegetarian, I became vegan. The experience turned me vegetarian. And I had stopped eating eggs and flesh, and the only thing left was dairy. And it was simply because I didn't realize the horrors of the dairy industry. And then I had a colleague at work who was vegan, and she said, you're vegetarian. And I was like, a passionate vegetarian. I felt very strongly about being vegetarian. Once I learned about animal agriculture, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to support this. But I hadn't made the connection between dairy and animal exploitation. And this person told me about that connection, and then I became vegan.
Did they show you something or just tell you?
She described the process and talked to me, and it was a few conversations over a short period of time.
Was it hard to quit dairy?
It was harder for sure, because I was really kind of addicted to dairy. Even when I started having these conversations with this colleague of mine, I even noticed I was a little bit defensive, and I actually perceived her as a little bit holier than thou, the way people perceive vegans. So I understand what it's like to be on the other side, but once I really got the issue, I really wanted to stop eating dairy. And I tried, interestingly, I tried to stop eating dairy. It took multiple attempts because I was so attached to it. And I would say I'm not eating dairy anymore, but somebody would be having a pizza, so just one slice. So I decided I needed to go cold tofu and just stop, and then it was fine after that. But this was in the 80s. This was when, soy milk was like white water. It was disgusting. And all we had to eat was jiggly blocks of tofu. It was not like it is today.
Now, did anything change physiologically, mentally, or emotionally after you went vegan?
A lot changed for me after I went vegan, physiologically and mentally, and also emotionally, absolutely. Physically, I just got a lot healthier. I just felt lighter, I felt better, my digestion was better, so there's no question about that. My skin got better. I'm definitely, I'm healthier today, and I'm 56 now than I was when I was, 22 before I went vegan. So I feel healthier anyway. And what changed for me psychologically and emotionally, a lot changed for me because I became aware. I woke up to the fact that we are living in what can only be called a global atrocity. And this really messed with my mind. This is really what led me on the journey, that brought me to the work that I do today. I could not believe when I learned about the reality of animal agriculture, what was happening to the animals, of course, the environment. They didn't even know back then anything near what they know today, but it was enough. Human health, I was shocked, and it's like all of a sudden this light bulb went off, and it's that expression, we don't see different things, we see the same things differently. I didn't see different things. I saw the same things differently. And all of a sudden the world looked very different. You know, I saw meat trucks driving down the street were suddenly trucks with body parts in them. And, you know, everywhere I turned, people were putting the bodies of dead beings into their mouths as though nothing at all were wrong. And these were people who cared about animals and loved their own pets and thought that something was wrong with me because I found this behavior concerning, you know, more than concerning. So, you know, I felt like I woke up in the midst of a collective insanity. When I tried to talk about what I was learning with people, they would always say things like, don't tell me that, you'll ruin my meal, or they'd call me like a radical vegan hippie propagandist. And these were like rational people. They were compassionate people. They were my friends and family members, people like I had just been a few months before, really. And I looked back on my life and thought, like, how could I have remained completely unaware of what was right in front of me? Like, what is going on in our world? What was going on in my mind that this is happening, that this is possible? So my psychology changed quite a lot for the better. And, you know, I also felt disturbed. You know, I felt awake, but I felt disturbed. And, you know, emotionally, it was also quite difficult because once you realize what's happening, you know, once you realize the level of exploitation and suffering that's happening, you know, that farmed animals are going through, your life is never the same. So it was empowering to wake up to these truths, because then I had a choice. Like, I could choose to not be a part of this problem anymore. And that felt very empowering. But it was also devastating and deeply, deeply disturbing to see the state of humanity, essentially.
How do you stay positive in such a sick world like that? Like seeing the world for the way you're describing it.
It's important for advocates, for anybody, you know, who wakes up to these realities. And obviously the exploitation of animals is one form of myriad forms of exploitation, right? So after this, I started waking up to other problematic systems, other, you know, isms and, you know, involving human exploitation, you know, environmental exploitation and so on. And it's very, very important to, you know, this is what led me to do my work, like to help people, the people who are working to create a better world, to be able to do so in a way that feels sustainable and healthy to them. Because it's very difficult to navigate the psychological reality of where we find ourselves. And so one key is to feeling like, you know, like you have a sense of agency. It's really easy to feel helpless in the face of such staggering, overwhelming suffering. And when you feel helpless, you can really despair and just feel like I am surrounded by horror and there is absolutely nothing I can do to make any difference. You need to find a way to channel that energy into positive change. I mean, this is one of many strategies. And that was what I did. You know, I said I was young enough at the time, I had enough opportunity at the time to really start to think about, how do I want to shape the trajectory of the rest of my life so that I can do everything that I can to help end this suffering.
It sounds like you do that by getting involved.
I eventually enrolled in a doctoral program in psychology and did my PhD in psychology. I was at this point becoming an educator, was involved in becoming an educator. So my first profession was as an educator, and then I ended up getting a PhD in psychology. I focused on the psychology of violence and nonviolence, and specifically wrote my doctoral dissertation on the psychology of eating animals, of what I came to call Carnism. And this research, it led me to identify what I came to call Carnism, which is the invisible belief system or ideology that conditions people to eat certain animals. And I really wanted to understand how it was that compassionate, rational people could participate in an atrocity that's completely antithetical, you know, in opposition to their own core values and their own interests ultimately, and the interests of others, without even realizing what they're doing. So this is what I wrote my doctoral dissertation on and what my research was on, and, you know, really sort of illuminated the psychological, the mentality that enables people to eat certain animals. And that became popularized in my book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows. And that book ended up becoming a bestseller in various languages, and it's been published in, I think, 20 languages at this point. And it led me to found Beyond Carnism, which is the NGO that I'm the founding president of. And the work that we do at Beyond Carnism is our mission is to expose and transform carnism globally. And we do this through awareness raising awareness of carnism, often among non-vegans, right? To help people understand, this is why I wrote my book in the first place, like not simply why people shouldn't eat meat. There are plenty of books about the problems with eating animals, right? But why people do eat animals in the first place, so they could step outside of the system and make more rational and ultimately more compassionate choices. So we run awareness raising programs, we create videos and do media outreach, and we also run the Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy, where we provide a lot of different types of materials, courses, trainings, in-person, online, books, videos, to empower the people who are already working to transform carnism, basically people who are advocating a move toward veganism, to do so as effectively as possible and provide people with the tools to take care of themselves in the process and to be sustainable. To your point earlier, how do you stay positive in the face of what we're dealing with, right? So people really need to understand the psychology of social change, essentially, and what happens to us psychologically when we wake up to these atrocities, so that we can take better care of ourselves and each other.
Have you looked into why people fail at doing this?
So you mean when people who are vegan recidivism, they go back to eating animals? Yeah. I mean, there has been some research on that. So one of them was a lack of social support. So people, become vegan, and then they find that they're isolated, they're alone, they're being teased and excluded and feeling, just isolated. And that can create a lot of pressure on people. So that certainly is one reason. It's a reason that I think it's important to build, healthy, resilient vegan communities online and in person, of course. Another reason is people not feeling healthy on a vegan diet. And this could be that they actually don't feel healthy for other reasons, right? But then they go to the doctor and the doctor's like, oh, you don't eat animals? Well, of course that's why you're sick. Here, you need to eat some meat.
I'm glad you brought up community aspect. One way they can deal with it is immersing yourself in trying to create a community. And like in your case, you've immersed yourself in all these ways you just shared with us. It's important to, it sounds like, immerse yourself in it in a way, and community is, to me, the biggest thing. Like here in America, 1.5 people on average is your tribe size. Individualism has taken place of community. So I'm so glad you brought up community. That's becoming a theme in some of these interviews that I'm noticing that, people are thinking would help ameliorate the difficulties. As far as the health side, people a lot of times they go vegan and they don't know really how to eat. Because all their life they've been doing it wrong, right? And so how are they suddenly going to know how to do it right? For me, I didn't know for the first 5 years what to eat different until I started studying it. And then it took some learning. Had I not already kind of been on that path, I'd imagine it would have been very difficult and I might have got sick even.
Yeah.
Those are two, to me, very important things. As far as substance abuse, I've always wondered, or even mental health, if there's any evidence that focusing on nutrition might help push the person further from their target behaviors that they're trying to, change. If nutrition and, maybe a more compassionate lifestyle could be an effective part of a treatment plan in human services. Do you think that might be?
For people who suffer from addictions?
Yeah, or even any maybe kind of mental health, but that even,
Yeah. Well, I want to just make a quick point about the community point that you raised first. A lot of times vegans believe that they have to have other vegans in their lives in order to feel okay. Mm-hmm. And while it's a great idea to try to build a healthy community of like-minded people, for many vegans, it's also very important and sometimes completely enough to have the non-vegans in their lives be vegan supporters. So a lot of the isolation that vegans feel is not simply because they don't have other people who are vegan who they connect with, but because the non-vegans in their lives, the existing relationships they have with friends and family that are close, are with people who don't support their veganism. And what vegans do is they push really hard to try to convert those other people and get them to go vegan, which usually just creates more resistance. And I always recommend, to ask these other people in your life to learn about veganism. If anybody has any degree of closeness in a relationship, they need to be willing to understand the inner world of the other person. They need to see the inner world of the other person. Otherwise, it's going to be impossible to have any real authentic connection. So if you're vegan and you don't have vegan community or enough vegan community around you, even if you do, it can be very helpful to say to the non-vegans who you're close to, look, I would really love to be able to share information about veganism with you. Not to try to change you and make you go vegan, but to help you understand me.
Sounds like almost like maybe here's where your work could come in, because maybe that helps the vegans understand the people that aren't vegan better.
It's for both. So one of my books is called Beyond Beliefs, a guide to improving relationships and communication for vegans, vegetarians, and meat eaters. Wow. And this book is all about how to communicate across these differences to deepen understanding. And so I just want to share this message because very often vegans think like, oh my God, I'm only going to be okay if I build a solid vegan community, but I don't know how to do that. And just because somebody else is vegan doesn't mean they're a fit for me. There are people who are, just because somebody else is vegan doesn't mean that you have enough in common to actually have a close enough relationship. So, but if you can say to the people in your life, it's important for me you understand veganism. I want you to understand this issue. Here's what's happening in the world. Here's why I've become vegan. This is something that matters deeply to me. And if you understand veganism, it's a way that you can understand me. And this can change everything for vegans because then the people in their lives are vegan supporters. They don't tease them, they support them, they've got their back.
Wow, very deep. Now, as far as human services, whether it's mental health or substance abuse, I was in human services 15 years and I just felt like it was a disservice to neglect that side. Ideally, it would be a holistic service that's trying to help the person become the healthiest they can be. Is there anything to that?
Well, it really depends on what kind of human services you're providing, right? If you're doing like interventions like, trauma treatment for people in crisis, in communities in crisis, or in really underserved communities, it's not possible because there's not a lot of funding and it's not necessarily appropriate to sort of bring in other issues in that work because there's only so much you can do. All of that said, on the meta level, the answer is yes, because some of my other work focuses on what I call relational literacy, which is the understanding of an ability to practice healthy ways of relating. Basically, at the end of the day, the same mentality that causes us to carry out harm to other animals is the mentality that causes us to carry out harm to other humans and to ourselves. The mentality is really the same. Like, if you think about, for example, some of the most pressing problems in our personal lives and also in our world, domestic abuse, war, poverty, racism, patriarchy, sexism, animal exploitation, climate change, and on and on. These problems all share a common denominator. And that common denominator is relational dysfunction. That's dysfunctional, problematic ways of relating between groups, between humans and other animals, between us and ourselves, between individuals, problematic ways of relating. And so one solution, it's not the solution to everything, but a common solution to these problems is building relational literacy, learning how to relate in ways that are healthy, to ourselves, to other humans, to other animals, and to the planet. And so when we learn how to build healthy relationships, this can transform everything in our lives. And, to your point, you raised the issue of our treatment of other animals and also nutrition, right? In like sort of a holistic human services model. I actually write about what I call the formula for healthy relating, and I'll share that because I think that's directly relevant to what you're asking about. If you look at any interaction or relationship's really a series of interactions, right? It's healthy when we follow this formula. We practice integrity and honor dignity. So practicing integrity basically means treating the other or yourself, you're always relating to yourself, the way you would want to be treated if you were in their position. It's treating with respect. So that's practice integrity. When you honor dignity, that means you think of and treat the other as though they are no less worthy of being treated with respect or occupying space on this planet than you or anyone else. So you practice integrity and honor dignity, and this leads to a sense of connection and security. And this is what we're all seeking, connection and security. That's a healthy relationship. It's a healthy interaction. It's a healthy communication. It doesn't matter whether you're relating to a non-human animal. It doesn't matter whether you're relating to another human being or whether you're relating to yourself through, for example, your food choices and how you treat your body. So in answer to your question, of course, when we want to improve mental health, psychological well-being, helping people improve the way that they relate and create a healthy understanding of and ability to practice relationships means helping them to eat more healthfully and to treat other animals better, so on and so forth. And often what happens is that there's a natural evolution. When people build relational literacy and learn to relate in a way that's healthy, it spills out into other areas of their life. So you might go to counseling because you and your partner need help and you're not getting along. But then you learn these practices and tools for connecting with your empathy, being more other-centered, building self-awareness, building compassion. All of these things that are fundamental to a healthy partnership are the very things that are fundamental to creating healthy relationships with other animals. So we stop exploiting them, or a healthy relationship with ourselves. So we put food into our body that's nourishing rather than harmful. When we build relational literacy, we learn to practice this formula in our life on a minute-to-minute basis, right? In all of our interactions, we practice integrity, we honor dignity, we respect, we learn to practice respect. And relational literacy is made up of a lot of principles and tools, but if we keep coming back to the formula and committing to the formula, and then we learn the tools of effective communication, building self-awareness, and so on and so forth, we become people who no longer feel comfortable participating in exploitation. And part of this also is just building awareness of systems of that exploit in the first place, right? Because a lot of people, know how to interact or relate in a way that's healthy, but they haven't made the connection or learned the truth about where their meat comes from, for example. So there has to be some awareness building component.
Do your books kind of go into some tools that maybe counselors could use to help people
Yes.
Tap into that core dissonance?
Well, I don't even think it's necessarily tapping into a core dissonance. I think you actually can use your own interactions, relationships, your communication as the training ground on which to grow into a healthier you. You don't have to go in deep and say oh my God, let me look at this dissonance. You commit, you say, here it is, here's the formula. Here's what a healthy communication looks like. And once you start using that, it transforms you. Yeah. So you change your behavior and that changes your perception. And yes, I have one book is a one-stop guide to building relational literacy. It's called Getting Relationships Right. And that's the whole purpose is to help people build these tools to build relational literacy. And I have a chapter in that book on unjust systems, on systems of oppression, essentially, patriarchy, racism, carnism, speciesism, environmental exploitation, and how that is a piece of the whole.
What are all the books you have? How many books do you have?
7 books.
7 books, and they're all on your website, right?
They're all on the website, carnism.org. I have a new book coming out in 2023 called How to End Injustice Everywhere, and that is people understand the way that relational dysfunction supports all forms of injustice, and how we can learn to change the way that we think and relate, interact, so that we can build more resilient movements for justice. Justice for animals, justice for the environment, justice for humans.
Do you have a quote you want to share?
Yeah, I guess I would use the quote that, we have this on our website. We don't see different things, we see the same things differently. It's not about seeing different things, it's about seeing the same things differently. Awesome. And people can get more information at carnism.org.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time. And where are we at?
The AVA Summit, It's been incredible. It's been a great, great conference. And it'll be happening again next year. So thank you.